Welcome to the Narrative Tradition podcast and to part two of the Embodied Enneagram. And this time we're going to zoom into why the Embodied Enneagram is so important and what is it actually, the Embodied Enneagram?
Great, thank you. That'd be good to talk about. Yeah,
Well, I started introducing you and immediately introducing the term the Embodied Enneagram. But for people who are completely new to this, can you give like a quick, short answer? What is it? Why is it
sure,
important?
sure. Um, well, as I said earlier, the Enneagram is a holistic system. And Gurdjieff was very clear on this. Of course, he didn't give us the personality types, but he talked about three kinds of people, depending on their predominant center of intelligence. And that's part of our work today. But the point is that the type, and I'm talking now type structure, not just personality. It's true for personality too, but underneath personality, the type structure is based in all three centers, not just our minds. We start with our minds because, we're learning things, we have ideas, we're developing our awareness. But to really work with our type structure, we need to work with all three centers. Uh, and sometimes we can do that one at a time. Sometimes we can do all three at the same time in a kind of a holistic approach. So, and the body and the emotional center, the body center and emotional center are very closely engaged. I mean, they have a long history. And so the embodiment or the somatic approach involves both the emotions and the sensations of the body. And so, and I would take it a step further. I would suggest that our innate body patterns, our temperament, or our neurobiology, the neurobiology of the nine types, and each one has particular neurobiology, and that is the basis for our type structure before there's even a coherent ego system, meaning that when we're little, that we're born, we come into this world with a particular neurobiology that then is the basis, the background, and the I don't know the kind of the support system for an emerging psychological way of being in the world. And so we need to understand that. And so I think it's just vital to work with these neurobiological patterns, as well as what Wilhelm Reich would call the patterns of body armor, meaning the places where we're holding in our bodies, and also the ways that our breathing has been impaired by, you know, adverse experiences throughout our lives.
Yeah.
So that's what it's about. It doesn't mean only the body because it's in the context of the holistic framework, but that we can understand the type structures and work with the type structures if we understand what the neurobiological patterns are.
What I understand from you is the neurobiology is there first, like the temperaments, the
Right,
emotions,
right,
and the psychology develops later when we develop our coping mechanisms. Yeah.
right. And a strategy, for succeeding and surviving in the world and putting that into a personality. And then, of course, in the modern world, personalities gets very complex. But again, it starts with the body. And, when we were young with the Enneagram work, we used to think that, well, we are this type because of what happened to us in childhood. And of course, we could point to that. We were in the context of psychoanalytic psychology. We were all going through therapy. I mean, we say, well, this happened to me because and that's why I became an eight or I became a two, or I became a seven, or whatever. But actually, later, when we became parents, we realized the kids come in with a certain temperament. All parents recognize, especially if you have more than one child, right? So you realize, it's like, wait a minute. And that is the basis for the Enneagram type structure. And so the good news is we didn't make the kids into their type. We have a lot of responsibility for their well-being, to love them and support them and do the best we can. But we did not make them into their Enneagram type. They showed up with that, or what was previous to the type, let's say, but it was the biological background of the type.
I recognize what you share now with us when I teach in my groups. that when people say, well, indeed, because I had this experience, that's when I developed my type. And I often ask, well, is there a possibility that's the other way around, that this is your earliest remembrance of that you became
Right.
reactive in the style of your type?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And of course, in my family, I'm the eldest of five boys, and we were in pretty much the same environment. And, we have multiple types. I mean,
yeah. And
and,
that's then
and
also always the question I ask, do you have brothers and sisters? And this
right.
is
How
when,
come we're not all the same type? Well, we're
yeah,
not. We come
exactly.
in,
Yeah. Yeah, it was
right.
just our response as a child to the challenges we were facing.
Right. And that's what we had to work with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Our neurobiological patterns, what we had to work with. And
And
I know is in the same situation that I came in, where I learned how to like get tough and fight back, somebody else, and indeed in my family, somebody else adapted and became, used what they had to have a very different response to the same difficult situation.
and when you talk about the neurobiology, the temperament was there first. And you also mentioned earlier Gurdjieff. I have a question about this to you because Gurdjieff talk about indeed the centers, but also like the one brain and the two brain and the three brained person.
Yeah.
That our body has a memory too, and a body has, well, in Gurdjieff's language, a brain of itself. Is it something you recognize, you work with, or is that a whole different approach?
We're very connected. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors in this work. And Gurdjieff, he had this funny language, as you know,
Yes.
and he talked about three-brained beings. It's like, well, that's kind of weird. What do you mean three-brained beings? You know what I mean? So later we got into holistic health. We said three centers and kind of like, oh, I get it. It's like the three brains. Now the neuroscientists are looking in at the area of the heart center and the area of the gut, and they're discovering what they describe as brain cells in the lining of the stomach, in the lining of the heart. In other words, neuroscience is apparently kind of validating to some degree, and I'm sure there's more to learn, but that we actually do have three centers of intelligence. They all function together, but in a holistic system, they're differentiated and they each have their own separate functioning to some degree. And we know this. We know because, for example, talking about love, for example, how we love people. Well, you can love people from each of the three centers in a different way. It's different kinds of love. People talk about love. Well, what do you mean? Well, there's love from the mind, to seeing and appreciating. There's love from the heart, which is empathy and compassion and devotion. And there's love from the body center, which is actually doing things for people. And so all
And
three
that
of those centers need to be engaged to live a full life.
apart from the doing, your body also tells you with who you feel comfortable and with who gives you a good feeling.
Yep.
So, well,
And who
I'm a
you're
body type
attracted
too,
to.
so it's a strong body experience.
Well, you're a body type, so you know about this stuff, huh?
Yes, yes.
And we say for type ones, by the way, one of their aspects of temperament is they just have a sense in their bodies how things can fit together in the right way. I'm telling, and now I know they later on they think about it and they analyze, and sometimes they think they're head ties, but I'm certain that once it starts in the body, they just have a sense, a felt sense of, oh, this could come together in a more organized way. And that picture that's on the wall in a crooked position, you know how they just have such a hard time letting that be. It disturbs them physically. It's not right. So it
Well,
starts with the
that's the
intelligence of the
environment
body.
and the worry. It's not like, of course, there are different issues. So we have also have as type one, but the thing that's always for me from a child always is strongest in myself is that I feel like a ache in my belly. if I don't feel safe, or I'm in a difficult situation, or difficult situation with other people, then, or like a conflict or something, then then the stomach ache, it's terrible. And
Mm.
then it's indeed to give myself to breathe through it,
Right,
to
right,
soften it. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So there's work there for you and your belly, and there's also intelligence there. The
indeed.
belly is talking to you.
Exactly, exactly. Yes. Okay, for people listening, we've learned a lot already from you now, but what do they get from when they take a 3-day course with you? Do you
Right.
advise it for Enneagram teachers? Is it for people for their personal healing and development?
Um, Great question. Big question. Well, first of all, in terms of the content, I'm interested in communicating a kind of structures, 9 structures, and how the 9 body-based structures can be seen. Now, of course, we know that just with anything having to do with the Enneagram, we are more than our type, right? We're more than our patterns. So I want to be clear about that. And nobody fits the description exactly, you know, but it's a great place to explore from. And a lot of the patterns actually are there, and sometimes the patterns have to do with our strengths. And of course, oftentimes, if we overdo our strengths, now they also become problems. The same aspect, the same characteristic can be a strength. It can also be a real problem, depending on how we work with it. So that's a good, way to look at it. So to understand the 9 neurobiological patterns, and I could say a little more about those, but also talk about the kind of the somatic patterns, meaning um, how we have responded to our environment and, to things that have been wounding or difficult in our lives. Of course, it all shows up in our body. I guess it was Bessel van der Kolk who wrote a book called The Body Knows the Score, right? It's a great book. And he talks about all this stuff. We hold our experience in our bodies, and sometimes we hold it in ways that, again, it's part of our defense system, right? That we have armoring, meaning that we have chronic patterns of holding intention that we needed when we were young to protect ourselves, but walking around later in life with these patterns of armor, we probably don't need them all. We need to respect that because they were there for a reason. But, like, for example, people, well, there were just 9 ways of understanding the body armor and the breathing patterns. Like, for example, some types have trouble getting the breath down below the diaphragm, right? So oftentimes, let's say feeling types. They can have a good breath in the chest. There's energy in the chest and the eyes and the face, and yet to get the breath down to the belly is very difficult. And of course, there are problems. If you can't breathe down in your belly, you stay caught up in your upper body. Um, that's not a great way that will impair your health ultimately, and it can also create problems in your well-being, your relationships, and so on. So getting breath down below the diaphragm is significant, particularly for people on that side of the Enneagram, whereas other folks have a different breathing pattern, a different holding pattern. And to understand that means we can tailor the work, the body therapies, we can tailor them to the person, to the individual. And so when people understand that, say, oh, this is what I can do. I don't have to do exactly what they're doing, but I can start here with what I need to do. And of course, there are practices. And when I'm teaching the program, it's not only, I'm not only presenting. In fact, at least 50% of the time, we're actually doing the body work. And again, we're doing the body work with respect to each person. I can say, here are the exercises. Here is the space for you to get into your feelings, because feelings often are part of what the body needs to release. And you decide, you know, how you want to engage with this. Try it out. Everybody can try it out to some degree, but you know, how do you want to engage with this at this time on your path? And so sometimes it opens up the possibility for deep healing work. But I'm also big on just education.
But what I understand from you is It's not just talking about the work, it's also learning how to do the work, experiencing the work, but you
Right.
create a safe environment where people are invited to experience what they.
Right. Right. So, and one person might be ready for really kind of a cathartic experience. Like oftentimes people are holding back their grief. Hey, let's use that as an example. And because in our cultures, it's not grief is it's changing to some degree, but there's been a problem actually with supporting people, allowing people to express their grief. And if you don't express your grief and you're carrying it around in your body, that's going to have consequences. And so for people to get the support and the permission to express their grief, and sometimes it takes work on the body because the body is actually kind of holding that back. And so there's some massage or some movement stuff or some reaching or some pushing or there's different things we can apply here that can help people not only get in touch with their grief, but actually express their grief. And for one person or more than one person, they will take advantage of that space. I was just in Singapore with this workshop, so I'm thinking about the people there and the differences in terms of their work. And other people are having a quiet experience. You know what I mean? They're kind of going slowly, and that's appropriate for them. So not everybody has to do the same thing, but I'm trying to do is show people self-help techniques and peer. I started when I was young in peer counseling, and it's just I kept doing peer counseling, but started adding the body work. So teaching people how they can work with themselves and with the people in their family or the people that they love. And it's like, it's not that complicated. We can help each other. And that's what I'm trying to teach.
for uh, for a couple of decades now.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
great.
4 or 5 decades, but yeah.
Yeah, you're teaching this for a couple of decades.
So there's an educational part. There's also a healing part. And I'm not no longer doing much one-to-one practice with people for a variety of reasons, including, the recent pandemic. But there are great body therapists available these days in a way that didn't used to be. I mean, we're fortunate because there's a lot of now body therapy schools, and they don't all use the Enneagram, and of course, I hope someday they will. But there's a lot of people who know how to work with deep healing, and again, the Enneagram is just a great guide for who we are inside, what's going on, what our patterns are, and what's the priority, what's the focus of our work.
Perhaps when body therapists are listening, or people in the breath work, perhaps you make them curious now to uh,
Right.
to,
Yeah, I hope so.
yeah, to
Right. I
come
remember,
to
yeah, I
find
remember
out.
my first training program for therapists and practitioners, and we got together, spent a day once a month, and it was a different format, but that was exciting. It's like,
Like in the Netherlands now, breath work is very popular.
right,
And just like I have the same experience as what you shared in the beginning of this interview, that there are great methods, but the point is in the application is that it's more often like one size fits all.
right,
And then I say, okay, you can even work more effective, more powerful, bring more healing if you're able to tune it to people's Enneagram.
right, exactly. And that's a little more complicated, especially in a group setting, but we can do that.
Thank you all for watching and listening to part 2 of the Embodied Enneagram interview. And we hope to have you back with us for part 3, when we're going to dive deep into the embodied Enneagram of each of the 9 Enneagram types.